Hi there, I'm Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez, and this is the Design Your Physician Life podcast. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Daniel Hochman from selfrecovery.org. We are actually going to be talking about a very important topic that it has touched many of our lives, and it's that about physicians have addiction too. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Design Your Physician Life podcast, where you will get excited about being a physician, learn the tools that can help boost your success, and great tips from successful doctors. Join us to unlock the keys to an amazing physician life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez.
Hey guys, welcome to this episode. I'm extremely excited today because we have a topic that's going to be very important for many of us. We have Dr. Daniel Hochman. He's a psychiatrist in Texas, and he's the founder of selfrecovery.org. This is an entirely online addiction recovery program that provides evidence-based care without stigma or typical barriers to engage in treatment. Dr. Hochman regularly trains and speaks for addiction facilities, hospitals, and professional organizations to advance addiction care. He supervises at Delft Medical School and has a private practice where he treats addiction cases that have not fully responded to other forms of treatment. He's the past president of Texas Physicians for Social Responsibility, which he enjoys as a way of serving the community in creative ways beyond the clinical setting. And thank you for being here today.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Well, I'm very excited because today we're going to be covering a couple of topics that we really have not talked about in our podcast, and they're so important for our community as physicians. Being an anesthesiologist, we know that in that branch of medicine, there has been, a significant amount of addiction through the years. And I've seen friends of mine, colleagues, going and suffer through these families being destroyed by it. And when we're burnout, this is a very important topic to really understand and cover and see how our colleagues can get out of pain. But before we do all these things, let's talk about what inspired you to become a physician? When did you decide to be a physician?
I started my interest in the field in general. I was volunteer firefighting in college, and I just absolutely loved the medical side of it. Got to ride on the ambulance and was just kind of captivated. So I thought I was going to do emergency medicine, had started applying to residencies, and my sort of more long-standing interest crept in, where I just love knowing why people do what they do. So I like understanding human behavior ultimately. And that's sort of when push came to shove and I was applying, I just realized, no, I want to be able to sit with people and really know how they got to the ER and why they haven't taken care of themselves, and why they did something reckless. So psychiatry became the obvious choice after I realized what I'd want for a many decades long career. And so and I made sure that I sought out a program where I would be doing mostly therapy. So I do prescribe in my practice, but a good number of my patients I'm doing only psychotherapy with. And that's really my main interest.
I love it when you say it was the obvious choice. When people are going through medical school, it's not necessarily always the obvious choice to choose some specialty. It wasn't for me. It wasn't like the obvious choice. Actually, to the very end, I'm still evolving, and because of the wonders that you can find in every corner of medicine. But I'm glad that you decided to just become a psychiatrist, and that was so clear for you. Tell me what brought you eventually to develop this platform, that transition, because you went from residency, you went to your programs, and eventually you found a place for this platform.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest reason that I kind of went that direction was, I think there's a lot of ways that we suffer emotionally and with our behaviors. And so, to be honest, I don't have some hugely extra amount of interest in addiction as compared to other ways we suffer, say, with depression, anxiety, PTSD. It's all interesting to me. The reason that really took me down that direction was the addiction treatment is so siloed. It's a separate thing, and the treatment is so awful and really like many decades literally behind. Whereas depression and anxiety, for example, there's a lot of great therapists, there's a lot of great programs, and so there's a lot of good access. For addiction care, you can have all the money in the world and still just get such terrible care. And so there's a lot of confusion in the treatment, but also confusion just in the general public around how addiction works, what to do about it, where it comes from, and what to expect. So it's largely the lack of good treatment and the confusion around the topic that really compelled me to do something about it.
So is there something that you can give us that clarity into the topic itself of addiction that makes it, more inspiring for you to go this way? So what do you see that are maybe myths of addiction, should we say?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest myths is that you take a substance and then the substance, hits your dopamine pathway, and then there you go. You're off to the races and you're going down this addiction path because of the substance alone. And there's really just no evidence that happens, even though our research is still pointed in that direction to understand how these chemicals cause addiction. That theory has never borne out. The ones that do hold, and that there's countless studies for, is that that's layered on top of some kind of human suffering. So that could be depression, anxiety, a diagnosed illness, but it also, even more often, is just some kind of life angst. So I'm not happy with my career choice. I'm burned out with the wrong partner. I'm just not living the life I want to live. I've made mistakes. I have regrets. So there's all kinds of less obvious mental health issues that we suffer with. And so when you have that combined with a poor ability to regulate your emotions, you look outside of your own self, right? Your own mind and body. You look outside of yourself to regulate that distress. And so that's what addiction is. It really, I call it the story of human suffering, but layered on that is the inability to regulate internally. Otherwise, for example, you could be depressed about your life, but not have addiction. And so why is that? It's because a person with depression, as much as it might look dysfunctional, they can regulate at least in the sense that they can tolerate their feelings. But people with addiction tend not to tolerate that distressed state. And so they look to regulate it from the outside.
Do you think that's a biochemical issue? Have you seen that, besides, so you have the substance and you have the situation and you have the inability of the person to cope with that situation. So then there comes that substance. And then is there like a link for those people, like comparing people who are able to tolerate the situation versus people who are not able to tolerate the situation in a form that explained in biomedical and biochemical?
Yeah, perhaps I'll back up and say a couple of things about that. One is there's not any research that shows that these things are causal. So you can, for example, identify a gene or a pathway and say this person, has the setup for addiction. That might account for at most about 10% of the end result of addiction. By far, most of it is what we experience through our life. In other words, how we've come to suffer as a person. So the causal relationship is not that it's biological, and then we, find addiction because we were born that way. We've done plenty of research, and for example, you can get primates, and this happens in humans too. I'm only mentioning primates because they're more controlled studies. Humans are very, very complex creatures. But you can have primates and you stack these so-called addiction genes, right? So you raise, a monkey in only, full addiction genes, but a cold environment, in that case measured by, not a very warm maternal upbringing, And you can have all the addiction genes, all the addiction genes, but raised in a warm environment, so there's good nurturing, touch, breastfeeding, all that. And that monkey does not have addiction. And then you take the other case. So they have no addiction genes, but they're raised in a cold environment, a lot of withholding of that good maternal warmth, and they do have addiction. And that's just one small example. We can cite many population studies down to lab studies, but that always holds. So there has to be still some environmental piece to it. Now, where people also get confused is there's a biological process for everything. So if I may back up for 1 minute, at the core of everything is physics, okay? And then built on physics is chemistry. Built on chemistry is biochemistry, right? Organic chemistry. And then built on that, is our biological system, right? And then on top of that, we finally have psychology. And then after that, we finally have human behavior. So I don't distinguish in my mind, right? You can have more dopamine firing when you have a craving. But to me, you can call that a chemical process or biological, but that's the same thing still. I mean, any time we do or think or feel anything, there's a chemical process. There's a basis by which we feel, right? So if you feel good, it's going to be some concoction, perhaps, of dopamine. Also, some epinephrine gets fired as well, also some oxytocin. So you get this concoction. So there's always a biological basis for what we're feeling or what drives us to do things. But the mistake is then to attribute it, to that in a causal manner.
So talking about burnout, because you mentioned that, we know that at least even before COVID, 300 to 400 physicians were committing suicide every year. And we know that addiction can also be higher in different populations of physicians versus the regular community, as we understand. Tell us about that evolution. Have you had many physicians as patients? And then what are you seeing on them that our environment is really taking them to that pathway? What's the triggering factors that you're seeing for that?
Yeah, I'll start with the obvious ones. I mean, physicians have a hell of a time because we're squeezed between different interests. Okay, so we want to spend longer with the patient. We want to actually, cure things. We want to really help them. But then you have the constraints of time and RVU demands or administration not supporting what you're doing. You have maybe a patient who comes in with a menu of demands or, doesn't, want to, follow some of the lifestyle recommendations, and that can get frustrating. All the charting, defensive charting, 99% of OBs will get a malpractice suit. You add all that stuff in there. Oh yeah, and student debt. Maybe also the public perceives you as this rich person that doesn't have any problems. Physicians during COVID were not getting paid extra while all the nurses were getting, paid huge bonus and overtimes. So they're just, there's a million things we get squeezed on. So that's the obvious reason. Physicians really do carry more. An extra angle of that I think a lot of people, even physicians, do miss is that I believe we have an extra objective amount of stress in the field. So there's a difference between working in a store or an agency or some technology business. And yes, things are really important. And, if there's downtime in, some kind of program, that's bad. There's a lot of users then that get frustrated or, call in. But, to be in charge of someone's livelihood and their life and their wellness, that's a different level of burden. We see people die. We see people suffer. We see people suffering when we don't necessarily have answers. We see their despair. We see them not be able to go through with certain treatments because of, their own problems of money or family issues. And it's an incredible burden. Sometimes we leave with objectively more burden than someone, working a different kind of job, even if there's high hours and things. So that's important to remember as well. But if I may, I want to also shed some light on there's the present day stresses of being a physician. But for most physicians who have addiction, and yeah, I do treat several physicians in my practice. There's always the setup. We always have to remember there's a setup that comes before the actual thing. So it's not only the burnout that causes someone to commit suicide or causes someone to find addiction. The setup that I'm referring to is in the upbringing. So generally, physicians who have addiction were brought up, generally a couple different pathways, sometimes overlapping, but usually a very results-oriented way of growing up. So, think of your high achiever type A, like I want to really do everything right. That's a real setup for addiction, which we could get into if we want. On the other pathway is, not all physicians have come from these like really beautiful homes with intact parents and, only good memories. So childhood challenges, whether that's, nasty divorces or, neglect or abuse or just any, kind of hardships growing up, that's a setup for addiction. So the rates are many, many times higher when you go through those kinds of things. And very simply put, because, when you go through those things as a little kid, if you're not shown how to get through those hard moments, you develop patterns very early on to try and numb or avoid those feelings. And so, then you encounter problems, a couple decades later as a physician, and those patterns reemerge in full force.
So not too long ago, we were actually talking about resilience, the ability to bounce back. And that's very important there because those are things that you either learn very early, as you say, or you learn as you go. And as physicians, we're expected to have resilience. We're expected to bounce back. We go from one room to one room, taking care of patients, and then we can go through those highs and lows where in this room, we're seeing the worst misery that a human being can have. And then the next second, we're celebrating with somebody the most, maybe vain thing that we can see in the world compared to that misery that we saw. And then we're expected to just go bouncing from one side to the other, but we're not given those tools. So if you're coming, as you say, from those two upbringings where there's either perfection and it cannot fail, or where you really don't have those tools to be able to deal with these situations that we're going to see. And then on top of that, you're put in all these situations that without the appropriate training for either a normal person, then we're definitely going to have way more stress than many others. And you're saying there that, for example, OBs that are so, like 99% of them are going to be going through a lawsuit at some point in their careers. That's like a given. That's not something that they tell you when you're going to go to medical school, right? Or your residency. Oh, welcome to this residency. By the way, expect that, only 1% of you is not going to be going through a lawsuit. And that's really a lot of stress going through a lawsuit. It doesn't matter that if you're guilty or not.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And you got it on all this stuff. It's all in that setup. Right? So it's hard enough to go through, a lawsuit while you have crazy hours and no one saying thank you, when you show up at 3 a.m. That's hard enough. But yeah, on top of that, yeah, there's this character structure that most doctors have where we are that bad combination. We want to achieve, we want to do really well, we want to impress, we want to do really good, right? And we are so self-selected for that. I mean, you just can't get that far without having this huge drive to do well and achieve. And yeah, that that gets played with in a bad way, where you're in a system, throughout medical school and residency that rewards that. And you've got to go from one room to the next. Doesn't matter how sad or heavy it was. And a lot of us are, just in our, early or mid 20s when you do that. So that's still part of our development. We're quite young when we're going through the training. So it's not only like there's, childhood and then, then you're a grown up and that's all done. No, I mean, we're still kind of finishing our emotional development at a time that, we're holding bodies in our hands. It's so there's a lot of burden there that people don't recognize that they're carrying.
There was something, that you mentioned, because you have these treatments and you have online treatment for addiction. And then there's some people that are treating addiction in different ways, as you say, like there's no consensus. There's people who are even treating it with NAD without necessarily having a functional psychotherapy for these patients at the same time. So going from these myths of the basis of addiction towards treatment, how do you see a bridge there? Where do you see like the best combination of, okay, we recognize that this is a problem, this is the basis, this is where these people have been, going through this setup, and then trying to heal something that started so early in our lives, complicated by the environment that we've been putting under the expectations, and then trying to get a solution for these physicians?
Yeah, it's really a lot simpler than people make it. I sort of joke when I lecture on addiction, specifically when I'm teaching people who treat addiction, that I don't know what to do about addiction. There's not much to do. I mean, yeah, you can prescribe antabuse or naltrexone, or you can take their alcohol out of their cupboards, or there's an app that you can do, that'll monitor whether they've had anything to drink. There's, you can do urines. There's a bunch of rules and common sense things that you can do for addiction, but no one's looking for help with that. Every patient already knows that they shouldn't see a certain friend, or they shouldn't go out somewhere, or we already know our triggers, and we already know common sense measures to do. So there's not really much to do there, and we as providers should not really spend a whole lot of time there either. It should be very briefly mentioned, just to kind of run through a quick sort of landscape of, okay, well, have you thought about this and this and this? Okay, yep, check. Okay, now we're going to do the real stuff, which is then to address the underlying issues. So the joke of it all is, for example, a chemical dependency counselor, like an LCDC, is actually in malpractice territory if they're addressing underlying issues, because they are not trained to treat underlying mood disorders. So the bulk of who you would see at a rehab or going, for addiction therapy is not going to actually address underlying issues. And you're going to be stuck going in circles where they're basically telling you in one way or another, don't drink or don't use, and here's another trick or, tool, but there's not the, support underneath, right, to shift all the stuff that's coming up emotionally, the whole reason to begin with, that you're trying to regulate yourself with the object of the addiction. And so by far, most of the treatment is just so doomed from the start. So when I said earlier, it can be a lot simpler than people make it out to be. The simpler is just go straight to the underlying issues. People need so much less help with the addiction part of it than they imagine. I do think it can be helpful to see a therapist or a psychiatrist who treats underlying issues in the context of addiction, because there are some nuances to it. I'm not saying that it's to be totally disregarded. So it's good to treat mood in the context of addiction, but you should be treating the underlying issue. And whoever you're seeing should be totally equipped to do that.
So tell us about your platform. You have the selfrecovery.org. How does your platform address this? If I'm a patient with dealing with addiction, a physician dealing with addiction, what would be the steps for me to go through your platform? What treatment should I receive? Who's going to see me? What happens?
Maybe the first thing to say is that it is completely anonymous. So as a physician, we're unfortunately have to be concerned about the board, right? And self-identifying as an addict, and now I'm under board review, and I've got people who I don't know what their bent is, right? I don't know how often they're going to review me and what they think of addiction, reviewing me, and that they could take my whole livelihood away. So typically physicians do not raise their hand that they have an issue for a very good reason, which is what I just said. I mean, who wants to get on anybody's radar when your whole livelihood could be threatened? So yeah, the program is really wonderful for physicians for that reason. A lot of physicians do use it. So one is it's an online program for that same reason for anybody, right? You can find it, and you don't have to worry about having certain friends or family know about, that you're going to rehab or getting treatment. So it's as confidential as you want to make it. And so, yeah, you would just go to the program and you sign up. It takes just, not even a minute to sign up. And then you're in instantly. That's another barrier that exists in addiction. You want to get help, but then it's hard to get in somewhere. Or if you do, there's a wait list. With this, you just get going right away. And then what you find inside are lots of lessons. So they're bite-sized lessons given by video by me. And then those are followed always by journaling and integrating exercises. So you always have to integrate what you're learning. So there's a lot of interesting educational processes that I had to study to put the program together, because you have to make sure people are actually instilling what they learn. So that's all designed inside of there to integrate all the lessons, because they start sort of common sense, and then it gets more and more complex. It's a very layered program that goes on a very deep journey. So there are some of the obvious things, like a relapse prevention plan, identifying your triggers, some general education around how addiction works, but it gets deeper and deeper and deeper to finally meet people in that truest need. And then there are also live groups that are inside the program. So we have anonymous groups. You can show up to those and not even, reveal your name. You can even keep your screen off, but those are remote. There's also music that helps people emotionally connect to topics. There's a mindfulness series that's designed for specifically for addiction, and a bunch of other kind of handouts and resources and things. So yeah, it's quite packed, and it does take a few months to go through. It's pretty extensive.
What have you been measuring success, or if you were to measure success, how would you measure success in a program like this?
Yeah, measuring addiction success is got a lot of complicating factors to it, which I don't need to get into all of them, but you can imagine how hard it is to do follow-up studies, because rehab centers will do, white papers on their own success rates. Well, the problem is if you call someone, later, they may not want to come back or get reported or anything. So they say they're fine. They also, might not answer the phone, which is usually the case. And then if they do come back, those often don't get reported. So those rates are hard. We actually have, what I've used is called the Brief Addiction Monitor, the BAM. It's a very validated self-report that the VA developed. And so I do a pre and post questionnaire, and that goes through a whole host of things besides addiction. It's also just looking at your wellness and other levels of function and sleep, physical health, things like that. And that self-report actually is a much more accurate measure than bringing someone back in for an interview, because it's generally anonymous and there aren't really any hooks or repercussions to however you answer it. And so there's not the issue of them trying to please the interviewer, nor trying to make any, have any fear that anything's going to happen with their results. So yeah, our results, we have looked, and it's a 78% success rate, which is well beyond. I mean, in the addiction field, the success rate is way worse than people think. It's somewhere around 5 to 8%. So you go away to rehab even for 90 days, and you have call it a 90 or 95% chance that you are not going to get better. And so they
even the
were,
12-step program, right? Those are very poorly rated. And the
yeah,
success rate of those like is so low.
that's right. Yeah. And the doctor audience, here knows how rigorous and good a Cochrane review is. The Cochrane review of 12-step says it just doesn't work. And yet that is the basis for all of these programs. And sometimes they'll say, oh, we also do trauma-based care or CBT. Trust me, I have actually worked in some of these rehabs, one of which is considered, a nationally renowned center, and they're hiring interns. In fact, one of my patients' sisters, one of my patients told me this earlier in the week, but this is not unusual at all. His sister was hired at this top center, and she has, not 1 hour yet under her belt treating people on her own. So that's the way the industry is, and that's why I made the program. I mean, just awful what's out there.
So suppose that you have a colleague or somebody calls you about a physician who's in this situation. Which steps would you tell them to take, when they're first realizing that oh my goodness, I really have a problem?
Knowing that it can be hard to find a good rehab, knowing that it can be hard even to find a psychiatrist, who's going to do sort of a holistic approach around it. I think the safest bet is usually to find a very good therapist. That's generally a safe recommendation to make. And the reason is because, if you send them to rehab, there's a 95% chance that doesn't help. If you send them to a drug or addiction counselor, they're not equipped to deal with the underlying issues. So I would much rather them see someone who's very good at dealing with mood issues, life problems, upsets of life, frustrations. I'd much rather they see a really competent therapist who may not specialize in addiction. I'd much rather someone I care about, make sure they're doing that and trust that the addiction will fade along with good treatment. And that is absolutely what happens. So if it's not going away, instead of saying, oh, I need, a addiction specific facility, instead I'd find a different therapist that can better treat your underlying issues if you're not getting anywhere.
So if we understand that now treating the mood disorders are going to be the basis for anything, do you think that this would also be the preferred treatment for prevention of addiction, basically?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we look at population data, the same thing holds. So populations that struggle as a culture or at large have way higher rates of addiction. For example, people think Native Americans have this like special bad gene for alcoholism, and that's why they drink. They did not have documented problems with alcohol before being, put on reservations and then going, being displaced as a peoples. Same thing with, inner city Black population. They do not have high rates of addiction. If you look at, Native communities in Africa, they didn't even have high rates of addiction. Initially when there were, civil rights and things. It's afterwards, all the repercussions of what's happened socially that's caused a lot of inner city addiction and things. So yeah, and the same thing holds as an individual. I mean, if you have a parent in jail, if you get abused, I mean, there's so many higher times rate of addiction. So what we want to do is avoid emotional struggle. We want to avoid huge life challenges. And then if we do have them, equip kids or adults, to know how to emotionally regulate, that there are places to go. You can talk about it, and just learning that, well, there's just an enormous host of things there, right? There are actual strategies like, mindfulness or things like that, but there's also very deep forms of treatment that take, longstanding therapy to do. So, and everything in between. So yeah, it all matches up.
So as we end here our episode, are there any tips or strategies that you would recommend specifically for institutions who are in charge of physicians, right? anything that you haven't seen or you've seen success in prevention addiction for physicians that maybe we should have implemented throughout our systems?
Yeah, I think it's good to have on the treatment side some way of anonymously receiving treatment. So you have to get around that barrier. You can't say we offer these services or there's an EAP program, for our staff to get addiction help, because people are not going to use it if they're worried about being identified. So whatever that help is should be anonymous. And there are different ways to do that. Self-recovery is one of them. So self-recovery is used, for example, here in Austin by the police and firefighters. They go through high rates of addiction. They have to deal with a lot on our streets, but they don't want to raise their hand for help. And so there are liaisons within those departments that will support them to get into self-recovery, and it's off the radar. There's nobody. The program, by the way, is intentionally not quote unquote clinical. So it is not medical treatment being rendered. It's just a program like you could learn about anything online. So it is important to me for any institution that there's some kind of anonymous mechanism for them to get treatment. And the other side of that then too is not to just pay lip service, not to just say, okay, well, we care about your wellness and then here's these programs and resources. Instead, an institution ought to be interested to know what is burning out the physicians. Is there something going on with the RVUs that's stressing them? Is there a lack of support? Are they not allowing scribes? Is there not really good backup around, say, if they don't want to, dole out pain medication, but the system's pressuring them for better ratings or reviews? What conflicts is that institution placing the physicians in? And everyone listening knows there's multiple. So, if they really want to do something about addiction, don't just say, we'll treat addiction. You have to actually help understand why the physicians are going through a hell of a time.
Well, I want to thank you for being here today. This has been, more inspiring and eye-opening and all the things that we need really to take care of to start taking or thinking about taking care of so many of our colleagues, our physicians. As I said at the beginning, I've seen addiction destroy different families, especially through anesthesiology in our case. And it's not, it's a always present problem there, especially, now. I don't know what the statistics are since COVID this way. We know that burnout has definitely changed, worse on women. And thank you for being here. Tell us about how people can reach you, can reach your platform, sign up. How can they benefit from this service?
The easiest way to find it is just to go to the program. It's at selfrecovery.org. And there's contact info there. If you ask to speak with me through self-recovery, through that email or phone number, I'm happy to speak with any physicians. I really care about our community, want to make sure that we're all taken care of. So don't hesitate to reach out there. And then also my personal practice, which is in Texas only, of course, is hochmanhealth.com, if anyone wants. But I'm not, to be honest, too active on social media and things. So I've got some handles, but that's not the best way to reach me. So you can certainly reach out to my practice or the program, and I'd be happy to speak with anyone.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor to have you here today in our program, and thanks for everything that you're doing for these people in need for addiction. Which there's a stigma of addiction when you really are a person in true deep pain is what you are. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And I like the program that you do and helping physicians just realize that there's options out there, in our careers. There's places to go for help. And it's a difficult job, difficult journey. And so thanks for what you're doing.
Thanks a lot. Hey guys, that was it for today. I hope that you had a wonderful time like I did today with Dr. Daniel Hochman. You can actually find him at selfrecovery.org. I hope that this episode brought you some help, some clarity into any questions you had about addiction, especially in physicians. If you want to learn more about any of these topics, just reach out to us. Visit our website, maxallure.com, maxallure. If you also want to learn about our upcoming mastermind for physicians who want to learn about entrepreneurship. I hope you have a wonderful day. Give us 5 stars, subscribe, share the wealth, share the happiness with everybody else around you. See you then. Bye.
Please remember that Design is not providing specific financial, medical, or career advice. Our only intent is to stimulate your appetite for growth by sharing our experience and those of our speakers, coaches, and guests. Your personal growth and success will be unique to your circumstances and your hard work. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next week.